Hey there! Tonight we journey into the surprisingly complex world of medieval housekeeping, where cleaning wasn't just about tidiness, it was about survival, health, and navigating a world vastly different from our own. From aromatic herbs scattered across earthen floors to ingenious methods for battling smoke and soot, the story of medieval cleanliness reveals a people far more resourceful and thoughtful than history often gives them credit for. So before we settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if this kind of historical deep dive speaks to something inside of you. And let me know in the comments where the evening finds folks tuning in from, and what time the clock reads in those distant places. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe let a fan hum softly in the background, and let's ease into tonight's exploration together. When modern minds picture medieval homes, the imagination often conjures images of filth, darkness, and chaos. Popular culture has painted the Middle Ages as a time when cleanliness was abandoned, when homes were cesspools of grime, and when people simply accepted living in squalor. But the truth, as it so often does, tells a far more nuanced and fascinating story. Medieval people cared deeply about their living spaces, though their methods and standards differed dramatically from what anyone would recognise today. Cleanliness in the medieval world wasn't about sterile surfaces or antibacterial solutions. It was about managing the realities of life in a pre-industrial world, where homes were built from organic materials, where animals often shared living quarters, and where the very concept of hygiene was intertwined with spiritual beliefs, social status, and practical necessity. The medieval home was a living, breathing entity. Walls exhaled moisture, floors absorbed the daily rhythms of life, and every surface told a story. Keeping such a space livable required constant attention, inherited wisdom, and a deep understanding of the materials and methods available in that particular time and place. Picture this: a typical peasant dwelling in 13th century England. The structure rises from the earth like a patient growth, its walls fashioned from wattle and daub, that timeless combination of woven branches and clay mixed with straw. The roof above, thatched with reeds or straw, slopes gently, designed to shed rain while providing insulation against both summer heat and winter cold. The floor beneath, packed earth that has been trodden smooth by countless footsteps, serves as the foundation for all domestic life. This single room, perhaps 15 feet by 20, houses an entire family. In one corner, the hearth sends smoke curling upward, seeking escape through gaps in the thatch or a deliberately constructed hole in the roof. Against another wall, a simple bed frame supports a mattress stuffed with straw. Shelves hewn from rough timber hold wooden bowls, clay pots, and perhaps a precious metal cup. A chest, if the family possesses one, guards what few valuables they might claim. The air inside carries a complex bouquet of scents: wood smoke, damp earth, herbs drying from the rafters, the warm, musky presence of the family's few livestock sheltering at the far end during cold months, and the sweet, grassy aroma of fresh rushes covering the floor. To maintain such a space required daily effort and seasonal rituals that modern sensibilities might struggle to comprehend. Yet within this world, people developed sophisticated strategies for keeping their homes as clean and healthy as circumstances allowed. They worked with what they had, transforming limitation into innovation and scarcity into careful stewardship of every resource. The story of medieval housekeeping begins here, in these humble dwellings, where the line between inside and outside blurred, where nature was both ally and adversary, and where cleanliness was achieved through methods that had been refined over countless generations. This wasn't ignorance or indifference. This was adaptation, resilience, and a form of domestic wisdom that modern society has largely forgotten. As evening descends and firelight flickers across these ancient walls, the real work of understanding begins. How did medieval people approach the task of cleaning their homes? What tools did they use? What challenges did they face? And perhaps most intriguingly, what can their methods teach about resourcefulness, creativity, and the eternal human desire to create order from chaos? The journey into medieval housekeeping reveals a world more thoughtful, more intentional, and far more interesting than anyone might expect. So settle in, and let's explore the daily rhythms of cleanliness in an age when keeping a home meant something entirely different than it does today. Before exploring how medieval people cleaned their homes, it helps to understand what they were actually cleaning. The floor, that most fundamental surface, was in many medieval homes not a floor at all in the modern sense. It was simply the earth itself, perhaps packed and smoothed through use, but still fundamentally dirt. In peasant homes across medieval Europe, earthen floors were the norm. These weren't crude, muddy surfaces, but rather carefully maintained compacted soil that, when properly tended, could become quite hard and relatively smooth. Families would sometimes mix ash or lime into the earth to help it set more firmly, creating a surface that could withstand the constant traffic of daily life. The earthen floor presented unique challenges. It absorbed moisture readily, which meant that spills, whether from cooking, washing, or the inevitable accidents of daily life, seeped directly into the ground. During wet seasons, moisture could rise from below, creating a perpetually damp environment. During dry periods, the surface might crack or become dusty. Yet these earthen floors also offered certain advantages. They were self-healing in a sense, always ready to be smoothed and repacked. They provided natural insulation against the cold, and they could be renewed seasonally, scraped away and relaid when they became too damaged or soiled. More prosperous homes might boast floors of stone, laid in patterns or simply placed as flat surfaces. Stone floors were prized for their durability and relative ease of cleaning, though they brought their own challenges. They were cold underfoot, harder on dropped pottery, and required different maintenance strategies than earth. In the grandest houses, particularly by the later Middle Ages, wooden floors began to appear. Planks hewn from oak or other hardwoods were laid across joists, creating an elevated surface that kept the living space above the damp earth below. These wooden floors represented significant investment and craftsmanship, and they required careful maintenance to prevent rot and infestation. But whether earth, stone, or wood, medieval floors were rarely left bare. Instead, they were typically covered with a layer of organic material that served multiple functions: insulation, cushioning, and most importantly, a renewable surface that could be refreshed when it became too soiled or worn. This covering material was most commonly rushes, those tall, grass-like plants that grew in marshy areas throughout Europe. Harvesting rushes was often a communal activity, with entire villages heading to wetlands during the appropriate season to cut and gather these essential plants. The rushes would be dried, then brought into homes and spread across the floor in thick layers. The rush-covered floor was central to medieval home maintenance. Fresh rushes brought a clean, grassy scent into the home. They provided a softer surface to walk upon than bare earth or stone. They absorbed spills and moisture to some degree, and crucially, they could be periodically replaced, carrying away with them the accumulated detritus of daily life. But rushes alone were often just the beginning. Medieval housekeepers discovered that certain herbs and plants, when mixed among the rushes, brought additional benefits. Lavender added its clean, calming scent and was believed to repel insects. Chamomile released a sweet, apple-like fragrance when walked upon. Meadowsweet provided a honey-like aroma. Mint offered freshness and was thought to deter pests. This practice of strewing herbs among rushes was so common that certain plants became known specifically as strewing herbs. The more prosperous the household, the more elaborate this herbal layer might become. In manor houses and castles, the combination of rushes and herbs was carefully considered, with different mixtures used for different seasons or occasions. Tansy, with its button-like yellow flowers, was valued for its ability to repel ants and other insects. Hyssop brought both fragrance and symbolic associations with purification. Rue, though bitter-scented, was believed to ward against plague and disease. Costmary, pennyroyal, winter savoury, all found their way into medieval floor coverings, each chosen for specific properties beyond mere scent. The depth of these rush layers varied. In some humble homes, a thin scattering of rushes might be all the family could afford or gather. In wealthy establishments, rushes might be piled 6 inches deep or more, creating a resilient, cushioning surface that could be walked upon for weeks before needing refreshment. Of course, this system of floor covering brought its own maintenance challenges. Rushes didn't simply sit pristinely on the floor. Food scraps fell among them, spills soaked into them, dogs and cats slept in them, children played in them. Over time, the rush layer became compressed, matted, and increasingly soiled. This is where the real work of medieval floor cleaning began. The challenge wasn't just keeping the surface tidy, it was managing a living, changing layer of organic material that served as the interface between the home and its inhabitants. Medieval housekeepers developed sophisticated strategies for this task, strategies that balanced practicality with the resources available to them. The floor beneath one's feet was where the battle for household cleanliness was won or lost, and medieval people understood this fundamental truth perhaps better than anyone living in the age of vinyl and tile can fully appreciate. As the rushes slowly decomposed, as herbs lost their potency, and as the accumulated layers of daily life built up within this organic carpet, the time would come for renewal. But before examining that process, it helps to understand the daily, ongoing maintenance that kept these floors functional between major cleanings. In the gentle light of a medieval morning, as smoke from the newly stoked hearth began its lazy climb toward the roof hole, one of the first tasks of the day was addressing the floor. Not a deep cleaning, not yet, but rather the daily ritual of maintaining basic order. The primary tool for this task was simple: a broom. Medieval brooms bore little resemblance to their modern descendants. They were typically fashioned from birch twigs, or sometimes from broom plant, from which the tool takes its name, heather, or any other woody plant that could be bound together into a useful sweeping implement. These brooms were crafted at home, often by the family members themselves. A straight branch served as the handle. Flexible twigs or plant stems were gathered in a bundle, and bound tightly to one end using cord made from plant fibres or leather strips. The resulting tool was coarse, somewhat crude by modern standards, but remarkably effective for its intended purpose. The morning sweep was a ritual observed in homes from the humblest cottage to the grandest hall. Someone, often a woman of the house, or a servant in wealthier establishments, would take up the broom and begin working across the floor's surface, pushing debris, crumbs and any visible detritus toward the door or into a pile for removal. This wasn't the deep, thorough sweeping that might be imagined today. The broom didn't reach deep into the rush layer. That would have been counterproductive, stirring up too much of the underlying material. Instead, the sweep focused on the surface, addressing what was immediately visible and accessible. Crumbs from the previous night's meal would be gathered. Stray bits of straw from the bedding would be collected. Small items dropped and lost in the rushes might be recovered. The goal was to maintain a sense of order, to prevent the obvious accumulation of debris, and to keep the home's interior from descending into visible chaos. In households where animals shared the living space, this daily maintenance took on added importance. Chickens might be allowed to roam during the day, pecking for crumbs among the rushes. Dogs would curl up near the fire, leaving behind hair and the occasional muddy paw print. Cats would track in from their nighttime wanderings, bringing evidence of their outdoor adventures. The morning sweep addressed these daily deposits, pushing them out the door or into designated areas where they could be properly disposed of. In this sense, the medieval home existed in a state of constant negotiation with dirt, never achieving complete cleanliness, but never surrendering to total disorder either. After sweeping, some housekeepers would use their hands or simple cloth scraps to address specific spots where something had been spilled or dropped. A bit of water from the household bucket might be deployed to dampen and lift a stubborn mark from a stone floor, or to mix soil on an earthen floor that could then be smoothed back into place. The hearth area required particular attention. Ashes from the fire accumulated constantly, and while some would be left in place to help bank the coals overnight, excess ash needed to be removed to prevent it from spreading throughout the house. This ash wasn't waste, though. It was a valuable commodity. Wood ash served numerous purposes in the medieval household. Mixed with water and fats, it created a crude form of soap. Spread in the garden, it enriched the soil. Used in certain craft processes, it acted as a chemical agent. So the ash swept from the hearth would typically be saved in a designated container, stored until it could be put to use. The daily sweep also provided an opportunity for observation. A good housekeeper could read the floor like a book, noticing patterns of wear, areas where moisture seemed to be accumulating, places where the rush layer was becoming too compressed or beginning to rot. These observations would inform decisions about when and where more intensive maintenance would be needed. In larger households with multiple rooms or separate areas, the sweeping process might be divided among different individuals, each responsible for particular spaces. The hall would be swept by one person, the kitchen by another, sleeping chambers by yet another. This division of labour ensured that no area was neglected and that the work could be completed efficiently. The swept debris, once collected, needed to go somewhere. In rural areas, it might simply be tossed out the door into the yard, where chickens and pigs would root through it for anything edible. The organic matter would eventually break down, returning nutrients to the soil. In more densely populated towns and cities, though, waste disposal was a more complex issue, one that medieval communities wrestled with continuously. Some towns had regulations about where household waste could be deposited. Designated areas, often on the edge of town or in specific waste pits, were established for this purpose. Householders might carry their accumulated sweepings to these locations, or pay someone to cart them away. The wealthier the household, the more likely it was that this task would be delegated to servants or paid workers. Yet even with daily sweeping, the medieval floor was never truly clean by modern standards. The rush layer, after all, was still there, slowly accumulating its own collection of organic matter. Insects made homes in it. Moisture collected in it. The dried herbs mixed among the rushes gradually lost their effectiveness. This daily maintenance, then, was more about managing accumulation than achieving cleanliness. It was about preventing the visible disorder that would make life unpleasant, about keeping the most egregious mess at bay, and about maintaining a level of domestic order that allowed life to continue with dignity and relative comfort. The medieval housekeeper understood something that modern cleanliness standards sometimes obscure. Perfection wasn't the goal. Sustainability was. The aim was to maintain a livable space using available resources and reasonable effort, creating an environment that supported family life without requiring impossible standards of cleanliness. As the morning sweep concluded and the broom was returned to its place by the door, the medieval home was ready for the day ahead. Not spotless, not sterile, but tended, maintained, and ready to absorb another day's worth of living. There came a time, usually with the turning of seasons, when the daily sweep was no longer sufficient, when the rush layer had become too compressed, too soiled, too far gone to serve its purpose effectively, when the once fragrant herbs had lost their scent and their efficacy, when the earthen floor beneath showed signs of excessive wear or moisture damage. This was the time for the Great Refreshing, one of the most significant events in the medieval housekeeping calendar. The process of completely renewing the floor covering was not undertaken lightly. It required time, labour and resources. In many households it coincided with major seasonal transitions, particularly spring and autumn. Spring cleaning was a real and necessary practice in medieval homes, driven not by cultural tradition alone, but by genuine need. After a winter spent with the home sealed against the cold, with smoke from the hearth filling the air, with animals sheltering indoors and the rush layer receiving months of accumulated wear, the arrival of warmer weather signalled that the time had come for renewal. The first step was removal. The old rushes, now brown, matted and thoroughly permeated with the season's accumulation, needed to be cleared away entirely. This was physical work, often requiring multiple people. Using rakes, pitchforks, or simply their hands, family members would begin pulling up the old rush layer, section by section. As they worked, they might discover all manner of things that had found their way into the floor covering over the months. Small tools that had been missing, coins that had slipped from pouches, scraps of cloth, bone buttons, food remnants in various states of decomposition, the occasional dead mouse, all the detritus of daily life that had slowly worked its way down through the layers. The old rushes, once removed, were typically taken out to the yard or garden area. They weren't simply discarded as waste. Instead, they served as valuable compost material. The organic matter, along with all it had absorbed over the months, would break down and enrich the soil. In this way, even the dirty floor covering found new purpose. With the old rushes removed, the floor itself was exposed to view, often for the first time in many months. This moment of revelation was crucial. It allowed the household to assess the condition of the actual floor surface and address any damage or issues. For earthen floors, this might mean areas that needed to be repacked or smoothed. Depressions where water had collected would be filled in. Cracks would be worked closed. Sometimes a fresh layer of clay or soil would be added to renew the surface. The exposed floor might be left to air out for a day or two, allowing any accumulated moisture to evaporate and the surface to dry thoroughly. Stone floors, once exposed, could be scrubbed more thoroughly than was possible with rushes in place. Water, perhaps mixed with sand or ashes for abrasive action, would be applied. Stiff brushes made from plant fibres would be used to scour the stones. Particularly stubborn stains might be addressed with various mixtures. Vinegar, urine, a common cleaning agent in medieval times due to its ammonia, content, or specialised preparations. Wooden floors required careful attention. The planks would be inspected for rot, insect damage, or warping. Loose boards would be secured. Gaps between planks might be filled with oakum, loose fibres from old rope, or simply cleaned out to prevent accumulation of debris. If resources allowed, the wood might be treated with oil or wax to help protect it. This period with the floor exposed was also the ideal time to address any structural issues with the home itself. Walls would be inspected for cracks or damage. The hearth might be cleaned more thoroughly than daily maintenance allowed. The opportunity was taken to perform maintenance tasks that were impractical when the floor was covered. Once the floor had been properly cleaned and repaired, the process of applying fresh rushes could begin. This often required advanced preparation. Rushes needed to be gathered, either from the household's own efforts or purchased from those who made their living harvesting and selling them. The rushes needed to be properly dried to prevent rot once laid. The laying of new rushes was something of an art. They couldn't simply be dumped in a pile. Instead, they were spread evenly, working from one end of the room to the other, creating a layer of appropriate depth. Too thin, and they wouldn't provide adequate cushioning or absorption. Too thick, and they became impractical and wasteful. As the rushes were laid, this was the time to incorporate fresh strewing herbs. Baskets of dried lavender, chamomile, meadowsweet, mint and other chosen plants would be scattered among the rushes, distributed throughout the layer. Some housekeepers had specific patterns or ratios they preferred. Knowledge passed down through generations. The choice of herbs might vary by season. Spring floor coverings might emphasize fresh green scents. Autumn preparations might include herbs believed to ward against the illnesses of winter. Special occasions might call for particular combinations. Weddings, religious holidays, or visits from important persons could warrant extra effort in selecting and applying aromatic plants. In wealthier households, the seasonal floor renewal could be quite elaborate. Not just rushes, but also aromatic roots might be included. Certain flowers, when dried and added to the floor covering, provided both scent and visual interest. In the grandest establishments, imported spices might even find their way into the mix, creating floor coverings of extraordinary fragrance. The newly refreshed floor transformed the home. The scent of fresh rushes and herbs filled the air. The surface underfoot felt springy and new. The visual change, from dark, compressed rushes to fresh, green-gold stalks, brightened the interior. Light reflected differently off the new surface. The entire atmosphere of the home shifted. This seasonal renewal represented a significant investment of time and effort, but it was essential. It prevented the floor from becoming completely unusable. It addressed health concerns by removing the accumulated organic matter that could harbour pests and disease. It restored the floor covering's functional properties of insulation and absorption. Moreover, it provided a psychological benefit. The seasonal floor renewal marked the passage of time, celebrated the changing seasons, and gave occupants a sense of fresh beginning. After the long, enclosed winter, the spring floor renewal brought renewed energy and optimism. After the busy summer season, the autumn renewal prepared the home for the months of indoor life ahead. In some communities, the timing of floor renewal took on social significance. There might be an understood period when most households undertook this work, creating a communal sense of domestic renewal. Neighbours might assist one another, share resources, or exchange labour. I'll help you with your floor renewal this week if you'll help me with mine next week. The Great Refreshing, this seasonal transformation of the home's foundation, embodied the medieval approach to housekeeping. Not constant vigilance against every speck of dirt, but rather periodic, thorough renewal that restored the home to a livable state. It was cleaning not as endless warfare but as seasonal ritual, a practice that acknowledged the reality of living in a world where perfect cleanliness was neither achievable nor, perhaps, truly desirable. As the newly refreshed rushes settled into place and the herbs released their fragrance, the medieval home was ready for another season of life. The great work was done. Daily maintenance could resume, and the cycle continued season after season, year after year, generation after generation. While the floor demanded regular attention, medieval housekeepers faced another relentless adversary: smoke. In a world before chimneys were common, and in many humble homes before they appeared at all, the management of smoke and soot was a constant challenge that shaped daily life and cleaning routines. The hearth was the heart of the medieval home, providing warmth, light, and the means to cook food. It was essential to survival, but open hearths, particularly in homes without proper chimneys, meant that smoke filled the living space before slowly finding its way out through roof holes, gaps in the thatch, or cracks in the walls. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. Living in a smoke-filled environment had real consequences. Eyes watered and stung. Lungs suffered from constant exposure. Respiratory ailments were common. Belongings became coated in soot. Clothing absorbed the smell of smoke so thoroughly that it became part of a person's scent. Yet medieval people adapted to these conditions with remarkable ingenuity. They developed strategies to manage smoke that, while imperfect, made life considerably more bearable than might be imagined. The first line of defence was proper fire management. A well-tended fire, burning the right type of wood, produced less smoke than a smouldering, poorly maintained one. Experienced housekeepers knew which woods burned cleanest. Hardwoods like oak and ash were prized not just for their heat output, but for their relatively clean burn. Green wood, full of moisture, created excessive smoke and was avoided when possible. The fire's placement within the home was carefully considered. Most hearths were positioned centrally or toward one end of the structure, with an eye toward the natural movement of air through the space. Windows, when present, or door positions helped create drafts that encouraged smoke to flow in particular directions, ideally away from sleeping and working areas. Some homes featured what could be called smoke bays or smoke hoods, structures of wood, wattle, or other materials that captured rising smoke and funneled it toward roof openings. These weren't chimneys in the modern sense, but they represented an intermediate step, an attempt to control smoke's path through the home. Despite these efforts, soot accumulated. It settled on walls, coating the wattle and daub or stone with a dark layer. It collected on any horizontal surface, beams, shelves, the tops of furniture. It embedded itself in fabric and stored food in the hair and skin of occupants. The management of this soot became part of regular housekeeping routines. Walls in humble homes were rarely washed, as the materials they were made from wouldn't withstand repeated wetting. Instead, they might be brushed occasionally with brooms or cloths to remove the loosest accumulation. More commonly, walls were simply left to darken over time, the soot layer becoming part of the home's character. In stone buildings where walls were more robust, wet cleaning was possible. Water, sometimes mixed with vinegar or other cleaning agents, could be applied with cloths or brushes to scrub away soot. This was laborious work, and it was typically done only in wealthier households, where appearance mattered more, and where there was staff to perform such tasks. Wooden beams and rafters presented particular challenges. Soot accumulated in every grain and crevice, making them nearly impossible to clean completely. In grand halls and manor houses, these beams were sometimes wrapped in decorative cloths that could be removed and cleaned or replaced. But this was far beyond the means of ordinary households. Instead, most families simply accepted that their homes would be darkened by smoke. The interior surfaces took on a patina of soot that told the story of years of fires, of meals cooked, of winters survived. This darkening wasn't seen as a sign of poor housekeeping, but rather as an inevitable consequence of domestic life. Belongings stored in the home required protection from soot. Clothing and fabric items were typically kept in chests or hung from pegs in areas less exposed to direct smoke. Plates, cups, and cooking implements were stored upside down or covered when not in use. Food needed to be particularly well protected. Stored grain, dried meat, cheese, all were vulnerable to soot contamination. Some medieval households used what might be called smoke rooms or smoke chambers, areas deliberately designed to capture smoke for the purpose of preserving meat and fish. The smoke's antiseptic properties were well understood, and controlled smoking was an important food preservation technique. But distinguishing between beneficial smoke, for preservation, and problematic smoke, making the home unlivable, required careful management. Ventilation strategies evolved over time. As understanding of smoke management grew, homes began to incorporate more deliberate ventilation features. Louvers, slatted openings that allowed smoke out while keeping rain out, appeared in roof structures. Small windows, even without glass, could be strategically opened to create drafts that pulled smoke through the house more effectively. The gradual development of chimneys, first in wealthy households and eventually in more modest ones, represented a revolution in domestic comfort. A proper chimney channeled smoke directly outside, dramatically improving air quality inside the home. But chimney construction required resources and skill that put it beyond the reach of many medieval families. For those fortunate enough to have chimneys, a new cleaning challenge emerged: chimney maintenance. Soot accumulated inside the flue, reducing its effectiveness and creating fire hazards. Chimney sweeping became a necessary trade, with specialised workers, often children, who could fit into narrow flues, periodically cleaning these structures. Yet even with chimneys, smoke management remained an issue. Wind conditions could cause smoke to blow back down into rooms. Improperly maintained chimneys could become clogged. Cooking fires often produced smoke that escaped around the edges of hearths before reaching the flue. The smell of smoke was simply accepted as part of life. Clothing reeked of it. Hair carried the scent. It settled into every fibre and surface. Modern noses would find the interior of a medieval home almost overwhelming in its smoky atmosphere, but to those who lived there it was simply normal. The smell of home, of warmth, of survival. Some medieval households attempted to combat smoke's less pleasant effects with aromatic substances. Incense might be burned during special occasions, temporarily masking the ever-present smoke smell. Herbs hung to dry from rafters served double duty: preservation and air freshening. Pomanders, oranges or apples studded with cloves, might be suspended in wealthier homes, their spicy scent mingling with the smoke. The battle against smoke and soot was one that medieval housekeepers could never fully win. They managed it, adapted to it, and developed strategies to minimise its worst effects, but complete victory was impossible given the technology and resources available. The smoke-darkened interior was simply part of the medieval domestic experience. In this acceptance, there's perhaps a lesson about the medieval approach to cleanliness more broadly. They focused their efforts where they could make a difference, while accepting what couldn't be changed. Perfect air quality was unattainable, so they worked to keep it tolerable. Complete freedom from soot was impossible, so they managed its accumulation. The goal wasn't perfection, but livability. As smoke continued to rise from hearths across medieval Europe, as soot settled on beams and walls, housekeepers continued their daily efforts to maintain some measure of order. They swept, they organised, they protected their belongings, and they found ways to live with dignity in homes that, while smoky and sooty by modern standards, were warm, functional, and filled with life. At the centre of any discussion about medieval cleaning practices lies a fundamental challenge: water. Modern homes enjoy water on demand, hot or cold, flowing freely from taps at the turn of a handle. Medieval households had no such luxury. Every drop of water used for cleaning had to be carried, often from considerable distances, and this basic fact shaped virtually every aspect of how homes were maintained. For rural families, water typically came from wells, springs, streams or rivers. Someone, often women or children, would make multiple trips each day, carrying heavy buckets or jars from the water source to the home. This water served many purposes: cooking, drinking, washing, both of bodies and clothing, and yes, house cleaning. But the labour involved in obtaining it meant that water was never used casually. Town dwellers faced similar challenges, though the infrastructure varied. Some towns had public wells or fountains where residents could draw water. Others had water carriers who made their living transporting water from source to customer, selling it by the bucket. Either way, getting water into the home required effort and often expense. This scarcity fundamentally influenced cleaning practices. While modern cleaning routinely involves copious water use, washing surfaces, rinsing away dirt and mopping floors until they shine, medieval cleaning was typically a much drier affair. Water was used sparingly, reserved for tasks where it was truly necessary, or where its impact justified the effort of obtaining it. Washing walls with water, for instance, was relatively rare in common homes. The water had to be carried in, the wall had to be scrubbed, and then the resulting muddy water had to be dealt with. On earthen floors, this wet mess presented additional challenges. In many cases, dry cleaning methods, sweeping, brushing, scraping, were simply more practical. Certain cleaning tasks did warrant water's use, though. Stone floors in wealthier homes might be scrubbed with water, as they could withstand wetness without damage, and the resulting cleanliness justified the effort. Cooking vessels and eating utensils required water cleaning to prevent food contamination and illness. Wooden tables and benches used for food preparation and eating needed regular cleaning with water to prevent the build-up of food residues that could spoil or attract pests. Laundry, of course, required water, though this was often done outside the home proper, at riversides or in designated washing areas. The temperature of water also mattered greatly. Cold water was what was available most of the time, drawn fresh from the source. Heating water required fuel, which, like everything else, had to be gathered or purchased. A fire had to be maintained, and vessels had to be available to heat the water in. For these reasons, hot water was a luxury reserved for special purposes, serious laundry, bathing, or particular cleaning tasks that truly demanded it. Medieval people developed ways to make their limited water supply go further. Water used for one purpose might be reused for another. Water in which vegetables had been washed might then be used to scrub a floor or rinse out a bucket. The final dregs might be tossed into the garden or yard. Nothing was wasted. Rainwater was collected when possible. Barrels placed beneath eaves or in open courtyards caught rainfall, providing a supplementary water source. Rainwater was often preferred for certain tasks. It was naturally soft, making it more effective for washing, and it was readily available during wet periods without requiring trips to wells or streams. In winter, snow could be melted to provide water, though this required fuel for melting and yielded relatively little water for the volume of snow collected. Ice from frozen streams or ponds might also be brought inside to melt. These frozen water sources were typically used for animals or rough cleaning rather than cooking or drinking. The quality of water varied tremendously and was a constant concern. Well water might be clean and sweet, or it might be brackish and unpleasant. River water could become contaminated, particularly downstream from towns where waste entered the waterways. Medieval people couldn't see the microscopic pathogens that might lurk in their water, but they understood through observation that water from certain sources was safer than others. Springs were particularly prized as water sources. The water emerged from underground, often naturally filtered through rock and soil, and tended to be cleaner than surface water. Communities built around reliable springs, and landowners with springs on their property had a valuable resource. The storage of water inside the home required careful management. Water was typically kept in large pottery vessels, wooden buckets, or barrels. These containers had to be kept clean themselves, an additional task in the housekeeping routine. A bucket with algae growing in it or a barrel that harboured contamination could spoil all the water it held. Some households kept separate vessels for different purposes, one for drinking water, which was kept especially clean, another for cooking water, and perhaps another for cleaning water. This separation helped ensure that the water used for drinking remained as pure as possible. The difficulty of obtaining water meant that truly messy cleaning tasks were relatively infrequent. Major washing of walls, thorough scrubbing of floors, the kind of wet cleaning that requires substantial water, these were undertaken only when absolutely necessary. The rest of the time, medieval housekeepers relied on dry methods that preserved their precious water for more essential uses. Certain cleaning agents helped extend water's effectiveness. Sand, when mixed with water, created an abrasive slurry useful for scouring pots and pans or scrubbing particularly dirty surfaces. Ashes, when combined with water and animal fats, produced a primitive soap that enhanced water's cleaning power. Vinegar, though relatively expensive, could be added to water to cut through grease and leave surfaces cleaner. The seasonal variation in water availability also influenced cleaning schedules. Spring and autumn, with their increased rainfall, were times when more water was readily available, making them ideal for the kinds of cleaning tasks that required substantial quantities. Summer droughts meant water conservation became even more critical. Winter's frozen water sources created their own challenges. In this way, water scarcity didn't just limit medieval cleaning practices, it shaped them fundamentally. Housekeepers developed methods that worked within these constraints, finding ways to maintain their homes that didn't depend on unlimited water access. Their creativity and resourcefulness in the face of this limitation was remarkable. The medieval relationship with water was one of respect born from scarcity. Every bucket carried, every drop used represented real effort. This made people thoughtful about water use, careful about waste, and innovative in developing cleaning methods that achieved acceptable results with minimal water expenditure. As we consider medieval house cleaning, this context of water scarcity must always be kept in mind. The practices that developed weren't born from ignorance about water's cleaning power, but from the practical reality that water was simply too valuable and too difficult to obtain to be used with the casual abundance that modern society takes for granted. Beyond floors and walls, medieval homes contained various fabric elements that required their own specialised care. Bedding, clothing stored in the home, table linens in wealthier households, wall hangings, and simple cloth items like rags and towels. These textiles presented unique cleaning challenges that demanded different approaches from those used for hard surfaces. The typical medieval bed, at least in common households, consisted of a straw-filled mattress, perhaps some rough wool blankets or coverlets, and possibly linen sheets in more prosperous homes. This bedding absorbed sweat, body oils, and all the normal effluvium of human sleep. It also provided an ideal environment for various unwanted guests: fleas, lice, bedbugs, and other parasites. Washing such large items as bedding was no small undertaking. The straw-filled mattress itself was rarely if ever washed. Instead, the straw filling would be completely removed and replaced as part of seasonal cleaning rituals. The fabric ticking that held the straw could be washed once emptied, hung to dry, and then refilled with fresh straw. Blankets and coverlets presented their own challenges. Wool, the most common material for such items, is notoriously difficult to clean. It shrinks when subjected to hot water and agitation. It takes a long time to dry thoroughly, and when wet it becomes extremely heavy. Nevertheless, wool bedding did get washed, though perhaps only once or twice a year. The process typically took place on a warm, sunny day when items could be hung outside to dry. Large pots of water would be heated, though not to boiling, which would damage the wool. Sometimes the water would be mixed with plant materials that had cleansing properties. Soapwort, for instance, a plant that produces a natural lather when crushed and mixed with water. The wool items would be submerged in this warm, soapy water and agitated by hand, kneaded and worked to help release dirt and oils. This was strenuous work, made more difficult by the weight of water-soaked wool. Multiple rinses in clean water would follow, each requiring fresh water to be carried and heated. Finally, the washed items would be wrung out as thoroughly as possible, again exhausting work, and hung to dry. In good weather, they might be spread over bushes, draped over fences, or hung on lines. The drying could take days, and if rain threatened, the items would have to be hastily brought inside, still damp, presenting the risk of mildew. Linen used for shirts, shifts, and sheets in households that could afford it was somewhat easier to manage. Linen can withstand more aggressive washing than wool, and actually improves with repeated washing, becoming softer over time. Linen items might be washed more frequently, perhaps once a month or even more often in wealthy households. The washing of linen often took place at streams or rivers, where water was abundant and the current could help with rinsing. Women would gather at designated washing spots, bringing their soiled linens in baskets. The items would be soaked, beaten with wooden paddles or bats to help loosen dirt, scrubbed against stones and rinsed repeatedly in the flowing water. This communal laundry work served social functions as well as practical ones. Women gathered, shared news and gossip, helped each other with particularly difficult items, and formed bonds while performing this necessary labour. The riverside laundry sessions were regular features of community life in many medieval villages. After washing, linen would be spread out to dry on the grass, a process called bleaching on the green. The combination of sunlight and moisture naturally whitened the fabric, helping to keep linen looking fresh. This natural bleaching required space and good weather, resources not always available, particularly in urban settings. In towns and cities, where access to streams and open drying spaces was limited, laundry presented greater challenges. Some households hired laundresses who would take items away to be washed, either at their own homes or at public washing facilities. This service was expensive but necessary for those who lacked the space or time to do extensive laundry themselves. For items that couldn't be fully washed, medieval housekeepers employed other cleaning methods. Airing was a common practice, taking items outside on sunny days and hanging them where fresh air and sunlight could reach them. This helped reduce odours, discouraged pests, and generally refreshed fabric items without requiring the labour and resources of full washing. Brushing was another maintenance technique. Wool garments and coverlets could be vigorously brushed to remove surface dirt, dust, and loose fibres. Stiff brushes made from plant fibres or even animal hair were used for this purpose. Regular brushing kept items looking cleaner between full washings, and helped prevent dirt from becoming deeply embedded in the fabric. For particularly valued items or stubborn stains, spot cleaning was employed. A small amount of water, perhaps mixed with vinegar or other cleaning agents, would be applied to just the soiled area. The spot would be rubbed gently until the stain lifted, then the area would be rinsed and allowed to dry. This targeted approach conserved water and effort while addressing visible problems. Wall hangings, found in wealthier homes as decoration and insulation, required careful maintenance. These large tapestries or painted cloths were valuable and couldn't be washed in the traditional sense. Instead, they would be taken down periodically, carried outside, and beaten to remove dust. Brushing with soft brushes helped maintain their appearance. Any spots or stains would be carefully treated with minimal moisture to avoid damaging the fabric or colours. Table linens, used in prosperous households, needed regular washing as they came into direct contact with food. These cloths were typically made of linen and were washed using similar methods to other linen items, though perhaps more frequently given their constant use. Stains from food and drink required special attention, with various preparations used to treat specific types of stains. The simple rags and towels used for everyday cleaning and drying were among the most frequently washed items in the medieval home. These humble cloths saw hard use and were subjected to the roughest treatment, boiling in water with ashes, beating and vigorous scrubbing. When they wore out completely, the fabric might be unravelled and the fibres repurposed for other uses, or the rags might be cut down into smaller pieces for final service before being discarded. Storage of clean textiles was almost as important as the cleaning itself. Items had to be protected from moths, which could devastate wool stores. Chests made of aromatic woods like cedar helped repel these pests. Alternatively, dried herbs with insect-repelling properties, lavender, southernwood, tansy, might be placed among stored fabrics. Some households used sachets of crushed cloves or other spices for this purpose. Dampness was another enemy of stored textiles. Mold and mildew could ruin fabric items that weren't properly dried before storage or that were kept in overly humid conditions. Ensuring items were completely dry, storing them in dry locations and periodically airing them out helped prevent this damage. The care of textiles was labour-intensive work that typically fell to women of the household. In wealthy homes with servants, maids would be specifically assigned to laundry and textile care. In common households, the women of the family would coordinate to manage this work, often setting aside particular days for washing and devoting hours, or even entire days, to the task. The medieval approach to textile cleaning balanced necessity against resource availability. Items were cleaned when they needed it, but not wastefully often. The methods used were appropriate to the materials and the level of soiling, and throughout there was an understanding that textiles were valuable, requiring care to extend their useful life as long as possible. As clean linens were folded and put away, as freshly aired blankets were returned to beds, and as washed clothing was hung in its proper place, the medieval household achieved a form of textile cleanliness that, while different from modern standards, served its purpose in maintaining health, comfort, and domestic order. Among the greatest challenges facing medieval housekeepers was the constant battle against the various creatures that sought to share the home. Insects, rodents, and other pests found medieval dwellings highly attractive, and managing these unwanted inhabitants required constant vigilance and a variety of strategies. Fleas were perhaps the most ubiquitous pest. They thrived in the warm organic environment of medieval homes, finding ideal conditions in rush-covered floors, straw-filled bedding, and the bodies of humans and animals alike. A medieval person could expect to be bitten by fleas regularly, and the itching, irritation, and potential disease transmission they caused were accepted facts of life. Controlling fleas was difficult but not impossible. The frequent changing of rushes helped by removing the accumulated flea eggs, larvae, and adults living in the floor covering. Certain herbs mixed into the rushes, particularly pennyroyal, rue, and fleabane, which earned its name for this very property, were believed to repel fleas. Whether they were truly effective is debatable, but medieval housekeepers swore by them. Bedding presented particular challenges with regard to fleas. The straw filling of mattresses provided perfect breeding grounds. Regular replacement of the straw was essential. Some households would place fresh ferns or certain aromatic plants among the straw, hoping these would discourage flea colonization. Others would sprinkle dried wormwood or tansy through the bedding. For immediate relief, people might hunt for fleas on their bodies and clothing, crushing any they found. This became such a common practice that special implements, fine-toothed combs and small traps, were developed specifically for flea removal. Some wealthy individuals even kept small dogs specifically as flea traps, the theory being that fleas would prefer the dogs to human hosts. Lice presented similar problems, though they tended to concentrate more on bodies and clothing than on environmental surfaces. Regular washing of linens and garments helped control lice populations. Hair combing with fine-toothed combs removed lice and their eggs, nits, from hair. In extreme infestations, cutting hair short or even shaving was sometimes necessary. Bedbugs, those blood-feeding insects that hide in cracks and crevices during the day and emerge at night to feed on sleeping humans, were well known to medieval people. The wooden frames of beds, cracks in walls, and gaps in floorboards all provided ideal hiding spots for these pests. Controlling bedbugs was notoriously difficult. Some households would periodically disassemble wooden bed frames and scrub them with vinegar or other preparations believed to kill bugs. Boiling water poured into cracks and crevices might kill bugs and eggs hiding there. Certain plants, when crushed and rubbed on bed frames, were thought to repel bedbugs, though their effectiveness was questionable. Flies plagued medieval homes, particularly in summer. Attracted to food waste, human waste, and animal waste, flies buzzed constantly through living spaces. Beyond being annoying, flies were vectors for disease, contaminating food and spreading illness, though medieval people didn't understand the specific mechanisms of disease transmission. Keeping homes and immediate surroundings clean of waste helped reduce fly populations somewhat. Covering food prevented flies from accessing it. Some households hung bundles of aromatic herbs, particularly tansy or rue, which were believed to repel flies. Sticky strips made from paper or cloth coated with honey or other sticky substances could trap flies, a medieval version of fly paper. Moths were the enemy of stored textiles, particularly wool. Female moths laid eggs in wool items, and the emerging larvae fed on the wool, leaving holes and destroying valuable clothing and blankets. Preventing moth damage required several strategies. First, keeping stored woolens clean was essential, as moths were attracted to soiled items, particularly those with food stains or body oils. Second, using aromatic repellents, cedar, lavender, camphor, and various other strong-smelling substances discouraged moths from laying eggs in stored items. Third, regular airing and shaking of stored woolens disrupted moth life cycles and removed any eggs or larvae present. Rodents, mice, and rats presented serious problems in medieval homes. They consumed stored food, damaged property, contaminated living spaces with their droppings, and could spread disease. Medieval people understood that rodents were destructive and unwelcome, and they employed various methods to control them. Cats were perhaps the most effective rodent control method. Households with cats generally suffered less from rodent infestations. Cats were valued not as pets in the modern sense, but as working animals whose job was to hunt and kill mice and rats. They were fed enough to keep them healthy, but not so much that they lost their hunting motivation. Traps of various designs were used to catch rodents. Simple box traps that captured mice alive were common, as were more lethal designs that killed quickly. These traps would be baited with small amounts of food and set in areas where rodent activity was noted. Caught rodents would be killed and disposed of, their bodies often tossed to pigs or chickens. Some communities also employed professional rat catchers, individuals who made their living controlling rodent populations in towns and cities. These specialists used various methods: traps, poisons, trained dogs bred specifically for rat killing, and sometimes even trained ferrets that could pursue rodents into their hiding places. Preventing rodent access to food storage was crucial. Grain and other food stores were kept in sealed containers when possible. Clay pots with tight-fitting lids, wooden boxes with well-constructed seams, and elevated storage areas that rats couldn't easily climb to all helped protect food supplies. But rodents are persistent and ingenious, and complete protection was nearly impossible. Beetles of various species infested stored grains, dried meat, and other preserved foods. These insects could ruin food supplies, rendering them inedible or at least unpalatable. Keeping food storage areas dry and cool helped reduce beetle problems. Regular inspection of stored foods allowed infestations to be caught early before they spread. Severely infested foods had to be discarded, a serious loss for households operating on thin margins. Ants could become problematic, particularly around food preparation and storage areas. medieval housekeepers learned to create barriers that ants wouldn't cross. Water moats, small trenches filled with water surrounding stored food, prevented ant access. Certain substances, chalk, certain plant oils, powdered charcoal, were believed to repel ants, and would be spread across surfaces to discourage them. In regions where termites existed, they posed threats to wooden structures. These insects could silently consume the wood of homes, weakening structures until collapse became possible. Regular inspection of wooden elements looking for signs of termite damage was important. Affected wood needed to be replaced before damage spread. Some regions developed building techniques that minimized termite vulnerability, such as using stone foundations that prevented termite access to wooden structures. Spiders, while not always considered pests, were regular inhabitants of medieval homes. They built webs in corners, across beams, and in any undisturbed space. Some housekeepers tolerated spiders because they caught flies and other insects, viewing them as allies in the battle against more troublesome pests. Others preferred to regularly remove spider webs as part of routine cleaning, sweeping them down with brooms or brushes. Wasps and hornets sometimes built nests in medieval homes, particularly in thatched roofs or under eaves. These stinging insects were dangerous, and their nests needed to be removed. This was typically done at night when the insects were less active and required courage and careful technique. Smoke might be used to calm the insects before the nest was removed and destroyed. The seasonal nature of many pest problems meant that housekeeping efforts shifted throughout the year. Spring and summer, when insect populations exploded, required more attention to insect control. Fall, when rodents sought shelter for winter, meant increased vigilance against mice and rats. Winter, when most insects were dormant, offered some relief, though warm homes could support flea and lice populations year-round. Medieval people developed considerable folk wisdom about pest control, much of it passed down through generations. Some of these traditional methods had real effectiveness, the use of cats for rodent control, for instance, while others were based more on hope or misunderstanding than actual efficacy. But in an age without chemical pesticides or modern pest control services, any method that seemed to help was worth trying. The presence of pests was simply accepted as part of life. Complete elimination was impossible, so the goal was management, keeping populations low enough that they didn't overwhelm the household. This pragmatic acceptance reflected the medieval approach to household cleanliness more broadly. Perfection was unattainable, but reasonable standards of livability were worth fighting for. As medieval housekeepers continued their eternal battle against fleas, mice, flies, and all the other uninvited guests, they demonstrated remarkable persistence and ingenuity. They might not have won the war, but they fought tactical victories day after day, season after season, creating homes where human life could flourish, despite the constant pressure from the insect and animal kingdoms. Every medieval household generated waste: food scraps, ash from fires, worn-out items, broken pottery, organic matter of all kinds, and yes, human waste. Managing this refuse was a constant challenge that shaped daily routines and community life. The way medieval people dealt with waste reveals much about their relationship with their environment and their understanding of cleanliness. Food waste was perhaps the easiest refuse to manage, at least in rural areas. Scraps from food preparation, bones from meals, vegetable peelings, and other organic food matter could be tossed into the yard where chickens, pigs, and other animals would eagerly consume most of it. What the animals didn't eat would decompose naturally, returning nutrients to the soil. This method of waste disposal was efficient and practical, turning refuse into either animal feed or fertilizer. Kitchen waste that couldn't be fed to animals might be added to compost heaps, where it would break down over time. These heaps, located some distance from the house to avoid attracting pests too close to living spaces, combined food waste, animal manure, old rushes from floors, and other organic matter. The resulting compost enriched garden soil, creating a circular system where waste became a resource. Ash from the hearth accumulated daily in substantial quantities. Some of this ash was saved for its many uses: soap making, cleaning, gardening, certain craft processes. But there was always more ash than could be practically used, and the excess had to go somewhere. It might be spread in the garden, scattered on muddy paths to provide firmer footing, or simply piled in designated areas where it would gradually disperse. Broken pottery, damaged tools, worn-out leather, and other non-organic refuse presented different challenges. These items couldn't simply decompose. In rural areas, they might be discarded in waste pits, holes dug for the purpose of receiving household refuse that couldn't be otherwise used or recycled. These pits would gradually fill and eventually be covered over and abandoned, while new pits were dug elsewhere. Some broken items had potential for reuse, even in their damaged state. Broken pottery shards could be used as scrapers or as small scoops. Worn-out leather might be cut into strips for various purposes. Damaged cloth could be cut into rags. Medieval householders were ingenious at finding second, third, or even fourth uses for items before finally discarding them. Urban waste disposal presented far greater challenges than rural waste management. In towns and cities, the concentration of people created waste at rates that overwhelmed simple disposal methods. Animals couldn't consume all the food waste. There was no surrounding farmland to receive compost. Space for waste pits was limited, and the proximity of neighbours meant that waste disposal practices of one household affected everyone around them. Many medieval towns established regulations about waste disposal, though enforcement was often inconsistent. Some communities designated official waste collectors, who would go house to house gathering refuse and transporting it to dumping areas outside town limits. Householders might pay fees for this service, or it might be funded through general taxation. Waste might be taken to town middens, communal waste heaps located, in theory, at the edges of settlements. These middens grew into substantial mounds over time, visible features of the medieval townscape. They were, as might be imagined, unpleasant places, sources of smell, breeding grounds for pests and potential health hazards. Some medieval thinkers recognised that waste management was connected to public health, even if they didn't understand disease transmission in modern terms. They observed that areas with better waste management seemed to experience fewer outbreaks of illness. This observation led some communities to implement stricter waste management rules and to invest in infrastructure for waste removal. Rivers were unfortunately common receptacles for waste in medieval towns. Residents would simply dump refuse into rivers, assuming the current would carry it away. This practice polluted water supplies downstream and contributed to the generally unhealthy conditions in many medieval urban centres. Some communities eventually prohibited dumping waste directly into rivers. Though such regulations were difficult to enforce, human waste presented particular challenges. In rural homes, the solution was relatively straightforward. A simple latrine, essentially a pit with a seat, located at some distance from the house. These latrines would serve the family until the pit filled, at which point it would be covered over and a new latrine dug elsewhere. The waste decomposed naturally, though the process was slow. In towns, managing human waste was far more complex. Some homes had privies, small structures built over pits, similar to rural latrines but in much more confined spaces. These pits filled quickly and required periodic emptying. This unpleasant work fell to specialists called gong farmers or night soil men, who would excavate the waste and transport it away, typically at night, hence night soil, to minimise public exposure to the process. The waste removed from urban privies and cesspits had to go somewhere. Sometimes it was sold to farmers as fertiliser. Sometimes it was simply dumped in designated areas outside town. The gong farmers who performed this work were generally poorly regarded socially, but their services were absolutely essential to keeping towns somewhat livable. Chamber pots were common for nighttime use, particularly in households where venturing outside to the privy in the dark was unappealing or unsafe. These pots would be emptied in the morning, their contents added to the privy or, in some cases, simply thrown into the street. The practice of emptying chamber pots into streets was common enough that it became a recognisable hazard of medieval urban life. Some larger medieval buildings, particularly monasteries and castles, developed more sophisticated waste management systems. Guardrobes, essentially toilets built into walls with chutes that deposited waste into moats, rivers, or pits far below, provided more convenient facilities. These weren't perfect, they still required eventual cleaning of the collection areas, but they represented an advance over simple pit latrines. The management of waste from animals living in or near homes added another layer of complexity. Chickens, pigs, and other livestock produced substantial waste. In rural settings, this could be managed relatively easily, spread on fields or allowed to decompose in yards and eventually enriching soil. In towns, where space was limited, animal waste accumulated in streets, stables, and yards, contributing to generally unsanitary conditions. Seasonal variations affected waste management practices. In summer, waste decomposed more quickly, but also smelled worse and attracted more insects. In winter, frozen waste was less immediately offensive but accumulated until spring thaws created sudden overwhelming problems. Autumn, with its abundant fallen leaves and agricultural waste, produced different disposal challenges than spring's mud and melting snows. Some medieval communities organised periodic clean-up efforts, where residents would be required to clear waste from street frontages, clean out ditches, or perform other waste management tasks. These might be tied to important festivals or visits from nobility, times when communities wanted to present their best appearance. Despite all these efforts, medieval standards of waste management would be considered unacceptable by modern measures. Streets, particularly in towns, often contained accumulated waste. Bad smells were common. Pest infestations related to waste were endemic. Yet within their own context, medieval people worked to manage waste as best they could with available resources and understanding. The medieval approach to waste reveals a worldview quite different from the modern one. Waste wasn't something to be hidden away completely or sanitized out of existence. It was an unavoidable part of life that had to be managed but couldn't be eliminated. The goal was to keep it controlled, to prevent it from overwhelming living spaces, and to dispose of it in ways that minimized immediate harm. As medieval householders carried out ash, tossed food scraps to chickens, emptied chamber pots, and dealt with all the other forms of waste that daily life generated, they were engaged in just an eternal battle against accumulation. They couldn't win completely, but they could hold the line, maintaining their homes as livable spaces in the face of constant waste generation. And in doing so, they demonstrated the same pragmatic realism that characterized their approach to cleanliness more broadly. Do what can be done, accept what cannot be changed, and keep working toward livable conditions rather than impossible perfection. The medieval housekeeper's arsenal of cleaning tools was surprisingly varied, though each implement was far simpler than its modern counterpart. These tools were typically made by hand, often by the household members themselves or by local craftspeople, using materials readily available in the surrounding environment. The broom, already mentioned in earlier sections, was the workhorse of medieval cleaning, but not all brooms were created equal, and different types served different purposes. The common floor broom, made from bound twigs or branches, was relatively rough and suited for sweeping large surfaces and pushing heavy debris. A finer broom, perhaps made from softer plant materials or from broom corn, a variety of sorghum specifically grown for broom making, might be used for more delicate tasks or in wealthier households where finer sweeping was desired. Making a broom was a skill passed down through generations. The right materials had to be gathered at the right time of year, when plants were mature but still flexible. Twigs or stems would be sorted by length and thickness, then bundled together in a specific way to create an effective sweeping surface. The binding that held the bundle to the handle had to be tight and durable, yet also allow for eventual replacement when the sweeping end wore out. Brushes of various sizes served specialized purposes. Large scrubbing brushes, made with stiff plant fibers bound into wooden backs, could scour stone floors or walls. Smaller brushes might be used for cleaning pottery or wooden bowls. Very fine brushes, made from animal hair, could be used for delicate items or for brushing clothing and textiles. Each brush was crafted for its specific task, and a well-equipped household might have several different brushes for different purposes. Cloths and rags were essential cleaning tools. These were typically made from worn-out linen or wool items that had reached the end of their useful life as clothing or household textiles. Nothing was wasted. A shirt with an irreparable tear would be cut up, the good sections becoming cleaning cloths while the damaged parts might be used for something even less demanding or eventually discarded. These rags served countless purposes: wiping surfaces, drying hands, mopping up spills, polishing, and any other cleaning task that required a piece of absorbent fabric. Buckets and pails, essential for carrying and holding water, were typically made of wood, staved and bound with iron hoops. These vessels had to be kept in good repair, as a leaking bucket was useless. Over time, the wood could dry out and shrink, causing leaks, or the iron bands could rust and break. Maintaining household buckets was itself a task, requiring occasional soaking to swell the wood or visits to a cooper for repairs. Clay or pottery vessels served as containers for various purposes, holding water for washing, containing cleaning solutions, storing collected waste before disposal. These vessels were vulnerable to breakage but were relatively inexpensive and could be replaced from local potters when needed. Scrapers, made from broken pottery shards, shells or thin pieces of wood, were used for removing stubborn dirt or build-up from surfaces. A potsherd with a good edge could scrape dried food from a wooden table or remove mud caked on a floor. These improvised tools cost nothing and worked remarkably well for their intended purpose. Shovels and spades, while primarily agricultural tools, also served housekeeping functions. They were used for removing old rushes from floors, clearing out fire pits, digging waste disposal pits, and any other task that required moving substantial amounts of material. These tools were valuable and carefully maintained, as replacing them required money or barter. Baskets woven from willow, reeds, or other flexible plant materials served countless purposes in medieval housekeeping. They carried items to and from the house, held cleaning materials, collected waste, and served as containers for just about anything that needed containing. Different sizes and weaves suited different purposes. Tightly woven baskets could hold small items or even liquids, at least briefly, while looser weaves were fine for larger dry goods. Wooden tubs and barrels held larger quantities of water or other liquids. A household might have several barrels, one for water storage, another for brewing ale, perhaps another for washing items. These large containers represented significant investments and were carefully maintained. Coopering, the craft of making and repairing barrels, was a respected trade precisely because these containers were so essential. For washing clothing and fabric, special implements were used. Washing bats or paddles, flat wooden tools, were used to beat wet fabric against stones or washing blocks. This beating helped loosen dirt from the fabric fibres. While it sounds rough, properly done, beating didn't damage strong fabrics like linen and was an effective cleaning method. Washing boards with corrugated or ridged surfaces appeared toward the later medieval period, particularly in more prosperous households. Fabric could be rubbed against these ridged surfaces to work out dirt, an early version of the washboards that would become common in later centuries. For scrubbing floors, particularly stone floors, sand was often used as an abrasive. It would be sprinkled on the surface, then scrubbed with brushes or rough cloths. The sand helped scour away dirt and grime. Afterwards, the sandy debris would be swept up and the floor rinsed or wiped clean. Knives and cutting implements, while primarily used for food preparation, also served cleaning purposes. They could scrape surfaces, cut away damaged sections of items, or perform any task requiring a sharp edge. Most adults would carry a personal knife for various daily tasks, including ones related to household maintenance. For dealing with high surfaces such as beams or upper walls, long-handled tools were necessary. A broom head attached to an extra long handle could reach cobwebs or soot on ceilings. A cloth tied to the end of a stick could wipe higher surfaces. Medieval people were practical and would adapt tools for any needed purpose. Storage of these tools was important. A damp broom left lying on the floor would rot. Buckets needed to be kept in places where they wouldn't be kicked over or damaged. Many homes had specific spots where cleaning tools were kept. Pegs on walls for hanging brooms and brushes, corners designated for buckets, shelves or chests for cloths and smaller implements. In wealthier households, particularly manor houses and castles, the variety of specialised cleaning tools expanded. There might be special mops for cleaning large stone floors, elaborate brushes for various purposes, numerous buckets and containers for different tasks, and servants dedicated to maintaining and using these implements properly. The tools themselves required maintenance and eventual replacement. Brooms wore out and needed new heads bound on. Buckets developed leaks that had to be repaired. Cloths wore through and had to be replaced. This ongoing cycle of tool maintenance was itself a part of the housekeeping routine. Medieval people also developed various cleaning preparations and solutions, though these weren't tools in the physical sense. Mixtures of ashes and animal fats created soap. Vinegar served as a cleaning agent and deodorizer. Plant-based preparations were used for specific cleaning tasks. The knowledge of what mixtures to create and how to use them was passed down through generations, part of the accumulated wisdom of housekeeping. Some households developed their own special preparations, particular combinations of herbs, vinegar, oils, or other substances that they found effective for specific tasks. These secret recipes might be guarded and passed from parent to child, representing generations of experimentation and experience. The simplicity of medieval cleaning tools shouldn't be mistaken for ineffectiveness. These implements, used skillfully by people who understood their properties and limitations, could achieve remarkable results. An experienced housekeeper with a simple broom, some rags, a bucket, and knowledge passed down through generations could maintain a home as effectively as circumstances allowed. Modern people, equipped with specialized cleaning products, electrical appliances, and technologically advanced implements, might look back at medieval cleaning tools with pity. But there's something to admire in the simplicity, the durability, and the resourcefulness represented by these humble implements. They were made from materials at hand, repaired rather than discarded when damaged, and used until they were truly beyond further service. As medieval housekeepers worked with their simple tools, sweeping with their twig brooms, scrubbing with their brushes, carrying water in their wooden buckets, they were participating in traditions of domestic work that stretched back centuries and would continue forward for centuries more. The specific tools might evolve, but the fundamental tasks remained the same: imposing order on disorder, creating cleanliness from dirt, maintaining livable space in the face of constant entropy. While this exploration has focused on general patterns of medieval housekeeping, the reality was that cleaning practices varied considerably across the diverse regions and cultures of medieval Europe. Climate, available materials, cultural traditions, and local conditions all influenced how homes were maintained and what cleanliness meant in different contexts. In Scandinavia, where long, harsh winters and abundant wood resources shaped domestic life, homes were typically constructed of timber, with different challenges than the wattle and daub structures common further south. Wooden floors were more common, and their maintenance required different techniques. The smoke management systems in Scandinavian homes evolved differently, with eventually the development of sophisticated chimneys and venting systems. The cold climate meant that homes were sealed tightly against winter, creating different air quality challenges. The tendency toward larger, more communal winter quarters, where extended families and dependents might shelter together, created different cleaning dynamics. Snow as a cleaning agent, using its abrasive and absorptive properties to clean certain items, was a specifically Nordic adaptation. In Mediterranean regions, the milder climate permitted different approaches. Homes could be more open to exterior air, with less need for complete sealing against cold. Floors might be made of tile or stone more commonly than in northern regions, changing cleaning methods. The availability of different plant materials meant different herbs and rushes were used for floor coverings and cleaning. Water availability varied regionally and affected cleaning practices. Areas with reliable rainfall and numerous streams had different relationships with water than did arid regions where every drop was precious. Mediterranean communities might clean textiles in rivers more frequently than northern communities, where rivers froze solid in winter. Islamic influence in Iberian Peninsula regions introduced different concepts of cleanliness, particularly regarding water use for personal washing. These concepts sometimes influenced approaches to household cleaning as well, with greater emphasis on wet cleaning methods where water was more available. In Eastern Europe, cultural traditions from Byzantine and Slavic sources created different domestic patterns. The banya or steam bath, common in Russian and related cultures, influenced approaches to cleanliness for both bodies and certain household items. Textiles might be steamed as a cleaning method, taking advantage of the steam bath's heat. Germanic regions developed particular traditions regarding seasonal cleaning rituals, with specific dates associated with major household refreshment. These traditions were sometimes tied to pre-Christian festivals that had been incorporated into Christian calendar, creating a blend of pagan practice and Christian observance. In regions with strong monastic influence, cleaning practices might be shaped by monastic rules and standards. Monasteries were often centres of innovation in various practices, including household management, and their influence could extend to surrounding communities through the movement of servants and through general cultural transmission. Urban versus rural distinctions were perhaps more significant than regional ones in some respects. Cities across medieval Europe, despite their geographic diversity, shared certain cleaning challenges: dense population, limited space, complex waste management needs, and greater exposure to disease. Rural areas, while varying in climate and culture, shared different common features: closer connection to natural cycles, more space for waste disposal, different building materials and methods. Coastal regions had access to sand for scouring and to seawater for certain cleaning purposes. Inland regions used different abrasives and cleaning agents. Mountain communities faced challenges with cold and elevation that lowland communities didn't encounter. Each environment shaped solutions to cleaning challenges. Trade patterns meant that certain cleaning materials or methods could spread across regions. The spice trade, for instance, made exotic herbs and aromatics available to wealthy households across Europe, influencing the mixtures used in floor coverings and for air freshening. Knowledge of cleaning techniques could travel with merchants, craftspeople, and others who moved between regions. Religious differences also played a role. Jewish communities maintained distinctive cleanliness practices related to kashrut and religious law. These influenced general household cleanliness, with particular attention to certain practices. Islamic communities in regions like Spain and Sicily brought different traditions that influenced surrounding populations to varying degrees. Different fuels for heating and cooking created different cleaning challenges. In regions where peat was the primary fuel, the nature of smoke and soot differed from regions burning wood or charcoal. Each fuel type required adaptations in smoke management and soot cleaning. Building materials varied dramatically by region. Timber in forested areas, stone in regions with good quarries, mud brick in drier regions with suitable clay. Each material had different maintenance requirements and responded differently to various cleaning methods. Regional expertise developed around maintaining structures built from locally available materials, local plants available for strewing on floors, for making brooms, for creating cleaning mixtures, all varied by region. Mediterranean regions had access to herbs that wouldn't grow in Nordic climates. Each region adapted its practices to use what grew locally, creating distinctive blends and methods. Economic differences between regions affected housekeeping practices. Wealthier regions or areas with prosperous trades could import materials and employ more servants. Poorer regions made do with less, and developed particularly resourceful methods for maintaining homes with minimal resources. Plague and disease patterns varied regionally and influenced cleaning practices. Areas that had experienced particularly devastating outbreaks sometimes developed more rigorous cleaning standards or specific practices believed to prevent disease. The Black Death's impact on attitudes toward cleanliness varied by how severely different regions were affected and by how communities interpreted its causes. Legal and civic regulations regarding cleanliness and waste management varied tremendously between different cities and regions. Some places developed relatively sophisticated regulations early, while others remained essentially unregulated. These variations reflected different degrees of urbanization, different governmental structures, and different cultural priorities. Language differences meant that the terminology for cleaning varied. The specific words used for different tasks, tools, and standards reflected cultural priorities and distinctions. Some languages had rich vocabularies for cleanliness concepts, while others were less elaborate, potentially reflecting different cultural emphases. Migration and cultural exchange slowly spread practices between regions. A merchant's daughter marrying into a family in a different region might bring cleaning practices from her homeland. Servants moving to new positions in different areas carried knowledge with them. Over time, these exchanges created subtle blending of practices while maintaining regional distinctiveness. Despite all these variations, certain fundamental patterns remained remarkably consistent across medieval Europe. The basic challenges of maintaining homes in a pre-industrial world were universal. The solutions varied in detail but shared common principles: work with available materials, adapt to seasonal rhythms, prioritize efforts where they make the most difference, and maintain standards that balance ideals against practical constraints. The diversity of medieval cleaning practices across regions reminds us that there was no single, medieval way of maintaining homes. Instead, there were countless local adaptations, each shaped by its particular environment, culture, and circumstances. This diversity reflected the broader truth that medieval Europe, despite often being discussed as if it were a unified whole, was actually a mosaic of different peoples, places, and practices, each contributing to the rich complexity of medieval life. Medieval attitudes toward cleanliness cannot be understood apart from the religious and cultural beliefs that shaped medieval life. Christianity, the dominant religion of medieval Europe, had complex and sometimes contradictory teachings about cleanliness that influenced household practices in important ways. On one hand, cleanliness was associated with spiritual purity. The Bible contained numerous references to ritual cleanliness and purification. Medieval Christians understood metaphorical connections between physical and spiritual cleanliness. A clean home could represent a clean soul. Order in the household paralleled right order in the moral life. Church teachings emphasized certain forms of cleanliness. Churches themselves were to be kept clean as houses of God. Altar linens were carefully maintained. Priests were expected to maintain basic cleanliness, particularly regarding vestments and ritual objects. These standards, while focused on sacred spaces, influenced attitudes toward cleanliness more generally. Saints' lives often included references to cleanliness or the lack thereof. Some saints were noted for maintaining cleanliness despite poverty or hardship, presenting this as a virtue. Others were praised specifically for abandoning cleanliness as part of rejecting worldly concerns. These contradictory messages reflected Christianity's complex relationship with the body and material world. On the other hand, some Christian ascetic traditions viewed excessive concern with physical cleanliness as vanity or worldliness. The ideal of mortifying the flesh led some particularly devout individuals to deliberately neglect bodily cleanliness as a form of penance. Stories circulated of hermits and holy people who never washed, wearing the same clothes for years, as demonstrations of their spiritual devotion. However, this ascetic ideal was never mainstream practice for most medieval Christians. It was understood as an extreme devotion, suitable for hermits, and particularly holy individuals, not a standard expected of ordinary people living ordinary lives. Most clergy and religious thinkers advocated for basic cleanliness as part of proper Christian life. The concept of disease as divine punishment influenced attitudes toward cleanliness. If illness was God's judgment for sin, then cleanliness might be seen as less important than moral purity. Yet this coexisted with practical understanding that certain practices, cleanliness among them, seemed to reduce illness risk. Medieval people held both ideas simultaneously, without seeing necessary contradiction. Ritual purity concepts from Judaism, inherited into Christianity, maintained some influence. While Christian theology generally moved away from Jewish purity laws, echoes remained. The practice of washing hands before eating, while practical, also had ritual overtones. The association of certain times, particularly Saturday evening for Sunday worship preparation, with cleaning and washing had both practical and symbolic dimensions. Holy water, blessed by priests, was believed to have purifying and protective properties. Some families kept holy water in their homes and might sprinkle it as part of cleaning rituals, combining practical cleaning with spiritual protection. This blending of material and spiritual cleaning was characteristic of medieval Christian practice. Certain saints were associated with domestic life, and by extension with cleanliness. Saint Martha, who had served Jesus in her home, became associated with housekeeping. Saints associated with healing might be invoked for protection against diseases thought to arise from filth. This spiritual dimension added meaning to the practical work of maintaining homes. The church calendar provided rhythm to cleaning activities. Major festivals like Easter and Christmas were preceded by periods of preparation that included physical cleaning of homes as well as spiritual preparation. The season of Lent, with its emphasis on cleansing from sin, often coincided with spring cleaning, creating natural associations between spiritual and physical purification. Cultural beliefs beyond Christianity also influenced cleaning practices. Pre-Christian traditions, though officially suppressed, maintained influence in folk practices, beliefs about protective plants, about certain times being propitious for particular tasks, about the spiritual properties of thresholds, doors, and hearths, all affected how cleaning was performed. The theory of humours, derived from ancient medicine and maintaining influence throughout the medieval period, connected cleanliness to health in specific ways. Imbalances in bodily humours were thought to cause illness, and external factors, including cleanliness of living spaces, could affect these balances. This provided a theoretical framework for understanding why cleanliness mattered. Beliefs about bad air or miasmas influenced cleaning practices, particularly regarding waste management and ventilation. The idea that disease arose from foul-smelling air provided motivation for removing waste, reducing odours, and keeping living spaces as fresh as possible. While the specific theory was incorrect, The practical behaviours it encouraged were often beneficial. Social and cultural associations connected cleanliness to status and morality. Clean clothing, clean homes, and personal cleanliness were markers of respectability. A woman who maintained a clean home was considered virtuous, while slovenliness in housekeeping suggested moral as well as practical failings. These associations provided social enforcement of cleaning standards. Different cultural groups within medieval Europe held varying beliefs about cleanliness. Jewish communities maintained distinctive practices based on religious law. Muslim populations in regions like Iberia brought different traditions. These various communities sometimes influenced each other, though religious and cultural barriers limited exchange. Magic and superstition intertwined with cleaning practices. Certain herbs included in floor rushes were believed to have protective or luck-bringing properties beyond their practical benefits. Specific methods of disposing of certain types of waste were followed to avoid bad luck. The distinction between practical cleaning and magical protection was often blurred. The concept of pollution, in a spiritual sense, affected how certain types of dirt were viewed. Human waste was considered particularly polluting, not just in a practical sense, but in a deeper, symbolic way. This contributed to taboos and practices surrounding its management. Similarly, contamination with certain substances might be viewed with particular horror beyond practical health concerns. Gender associations with cleanliness reflected broader gender ideologies. Women's responsibility for maintaining homes was connected to ideas about women's nature and proper roles. A clean home reflected not just on the woman who maintained it, but on her fundamental virtue and worth. These gendered meanings added weight to cleaning work beyond its practical function. The medieval person approaching the task of cleaning the home thus did so within a rich context of beliefs about purity, health, virtue, and cosmic order. They weren't simply removing dirt. They were, in a sense, participating in maintaining proper order in their small corner of God's creation. Physical cleanliness connected to spiritual cleanliness, to social standing, to protection against disease and disaster, and to basic human dignity. These beliefs motivated cleaning work even when it was difficult and resources were scarce. They provided meaning to labour that might otherwise seem endless and futile, and they embedded household cleaning within larger frameworks of understanding about how the world worked and how humans should live in it. Understanding these beliefs helps modern people appreciate that medieval cleaning practices weren't simply about removing dirt or meeting arbitrary standards. They were woven into comprehensive worldviews that gave meaning to every aspect of life, including the daily work of maintaining a home. The enduring legacy, what medieval housekeeping teaches us. As we conclude this exploration of medieval housekeeping, it's worth reflecting on what these long-ago practices might mean for modern understanding. The medieval world is gone, swept away by centuries of change, technological advancement, and social transformation. Yet in examining how medieval people maintained their homes, certain insights emerge that transcend their particular time and circumstances. Perhaps the most striking lesson is the resourcefulness demonstrated by medieval housekeepers. Working with limited tools, scarce resources, and challenging conditions, they developed sophisticated strategies for maintaining livable spaces. They wasted nothing, used everything to its fullest potential, and found ways to turn constraints into opportunities. This resourcefulness might speak to modern concerns about sustainability, waste, and environmental impact. Medieval cleaning practices reveal a fundamentally different relationship with cleanliness than modern society maintains. Rather than pursuing an ideal of sterile perfection, medieval housekeepers aimed for livable standards that balanced aspiration against reality. They understood that complete cleanliness was impossible given their circumstances, but they didn't surrender to chaos. Instead, they found sustainable middle paths, doing what could be done without requiring impossible perfection. This pragmatic acceptance of limitation might offer perspective to modern people, who sometimes feel overwhelmed by unrealistic standards of domestic perfection. The medieval approach suggests an alternative. Focus efforts where they matter most, accept what cannot be changed, and find satisfaction in maintaining livable standards rather than chasing impossible ideals. The seasonal rhythms of medieval cleaning highlight the wisdom of working with natural cycles rather than against them. Modern life, with its climate-controlled spaces and artificial lighting, has largely divorced domestic work from seasonal patterns. Yet there might be value in recovering some sense of seasonal rhythm. recognizing that different times of year naturally suit different tasks, and that forcing constant, unchanging standards year-round may not be optimal. The social dimensions of medieval housekeeping remind us that cleaning has never been just about removing dirt. It has always been bound up with social structures, power relationships, gender roles, and questions of value and recognition. Medieval cleaning work was primarily performed by women and often undervalued despite its essential nature. These patterns, while different in specifics, connect to ongoing modern questions about domestic labour, its distribution, and its recognition. The evolution of cleaning practices across the medieval period demonstrates that progress is possible, even in difficult circumstances. Innovations did occur, knowledge accumulated, methods improved. While change was slow and uneven, the arc bent toward better outcomes. This might offer hope to those confronting contemporary challenges. Solutions emerge gradually through experimentation, adaptation, and accumulated experience. Medieval approaches to limited water offer lessons for contemporary societies facing water scarcity. The techniques medieval people developed for cleaning with minimal water, while not perfect, demonstrate that reduced water use doesn't necessarily mean abandoning cleanliness. As climate change creates water challenges in various regions, there might be unexpected wisdom in reconsidering these older, water-conserving methods. The pest management challenges medieval housekeepers faced continue in modified form today. While modern pesticides offer powerful tools, concerns about chemical use and environmental impact have prompted renewed interest in less toxic alternatives. Some medieval methods, using aromatic plants, managing environmental conditions, and practicing careful sanitation, align with contemporary integrated pest management approaches. The emphasis on maintenance over replacement in medieval housekeeping contrasts with modern consumer culture's tendency toward disposability. Medieval people repaired, reused, and extended the life of items because replacing them was expensive or impossible. This necessity-driven approach might offer models for more sustainable consumption patterns. The community dimensions of medieval cleaning work, where neighbours helped each other and shared resources, speak to advantages of collective approaches to challenges. While modern society emphasises individual households and solutions, there might be value in recovering some sense of community cooperation around domestic tasks and challenges. Medieval cleaning practices remind us that cleanliness standards are culturally constructed and historically specific. What seems normal or necessary to one time and place might seem excessive or insufficient to another. This recognition might encourage humility about current assumptions and openness to different approaches. The integration of physical and spiritual dimensions in medieval cleaning suggests that domestic work can carry meaning beyond its material results. While modern secular society might not connect cleaning to religious purity in medieval ways, the broader principle remains. The work of maintaining homes can be meaningful, dignified, and worthy of respect rather than being dismissed as mere drudgery. The creativity medieval people demonstrated in solving cleaning challenges with limited tools and materials reminds us that innovation doesn't always require high technology. Sometimes simple, clever applications of basic principles work remarkably well. This might encourage greater creativity in approaching contemporary domestic challenges, rather than always assuming technological solutions are necessary. Medieval housekeepers' awareness of connections between cleanliness and health, while not based on modern germ theory, led to practices that often did promote better health outcomes. This experiential knowledge accumulated over generations had real value. It suggests that systematic observation and practical experimentation can yield useful knowledge even without complete theoretical understanding. The documentation challenges in recovering medieval cleaning practices, where so much knowledge was passed orally between women and left little written record, highlight ongoing issues about whose knowledge gets preserved and valued. The work primarily performed by common women wasn't deemed worthy of extensive documentation by medieval chroniclers. This pattern of overlooking certain types of work and knowledge continues to affect what society values and preserves. Perhaps most fundamentally, examining medieval housekeeping humanizes the medieval period. These weren't somehow fundamentally different people, living incomprehensible lives. They were humans facing universal challenges, keeping homes livable, protecting families from illness, managing limited resources, finding dignity in daily work, and creating ordered space amid chaos. Their solutions differed from modern ones, but their fundamental concerns resonate across centuries. The medieval household, with its smoke-stained walls, its rush-covered floors, its precious, carefully tended fire, its constant battle against dirt and pests, was a fully human space. The work of maintaining it was difficult, often frustrating, never fully finished, but absolutely essential. The people who performed this work, primarily women whose names history rarely recorded, were sustaining not just buildings but families, communities and civilization itself. As evening falls and firelight once again would have flickered across those ancient walls, as the daily sweep would have been completed and tools put away for the night, the medieval home stood ready for another day. Not perfect, never perfect, but tended, maintained, and preserved through human effort and care. Modern people, surveying their own homes with their advanced cleaning tools and products, their climate control and running water, their vacuum cleaners and washing machines, live in worlds the medieval housekeeper could never have imagined. Yet the fundamental task remains unchanged: creating and maintaining space where human life can flourish. The medieval approach to this eternal challenge, for all its differences from modern practices, offers unexpected wisdom for those willing to look beyond the surface dirt to the human struggles and triumphs beneath. The story of medieval housekeeping is ultimately a story about human resilience, creativity, and the quiet dignity of work that sustains life. It's a story written not in chronicles or great literary works, but in the daily efforts of countless unnamed people who swept their floors, tended their fires, washed their linens, and passed their knowledge to the next generation. Their work is done. Their homes long since crumbled to dust, but their story endures, offering perspective, insight, and perhaps even inspiration to those who continue the eternal work of making homes habitable. In the end, medieval people cleaned their houses the way humans have always cleaned their houses, with whatever tools and methods available, with whatever time and energy they could spare from other pressing demands, according to standards shaped by their culture and circumstances, and with the understanding that the work would never be finally finished, but would instead begin again with each new day. They did what they could, accepted what they couldn't change, found meaning in the work and kept trying. In this, they weren't so different from housekeepers of any era, including our own. As the centuries turn and societies transform, as technologies advance and conditions change, the fundamental human challenge of maintaining livable space continues. The medieval housekeepers who faced this challenge with limited resources but boundless resourcefulness left a legacy not just of specific techniques but of broader principles. Work within your means, adapt to circumstances, balance ideals against reality, and find dignity in the daily work of care and maintenance. These lessons, carried forward from those smoke-stained, rush-covered floors, remain relevant in the gleaming kitchens and ordered rooms of the modern world. And so we conclude our journey into medieval housekeeping, having travelled from the earthen floors of peasant cottages to the great halls of castles, from spring cleaning rituals to winter's enforced idleness, from simple brooms to complex social hierarchies. We've examined floors and walls, textiles and waste, pests and tools, seasons and beliefs. We've seen how medieval people approach the universal human task of keeping homes clean, and in doing so we've glimpsed something of their lives, their values and their humanity. The medieval world remains distant, separated from us by centuries of change. Yet in the simple act of a woman sweeping her floor as dawn breaks, of a child carrying water from the well, of a family refreshing their home's rush covering at season's turn, we find connection across time. The work changes. The fundamental human needs and efforts persist. And in that persistence lies both the particularity of the medieval experience and its universal resonance, speaking across the centuries to anyone who's ever picked up a broom, filled a bucket, or worked to transform chaos into order. One small act of cleaning at a time. Thank you for joining this exploration of how medieval people cleaned their houses. May the resourcefulness, determination, and quiet dignity of those long-ago housekeepers inspire appreciation for the work of maintaining homes in any era, and perhaps offer new perspective on the cleaning tasks that await in your own time and place. Good night, and may your own homes, whether medieval cottage or modern apartment, be places of order, comfort, and peace.